now. So hello class. My name's Alex and this is Justin. We both are your TAs for this class. And some of you guys had questions about homework, especially number 1, 3, and 5, I suppose. So we're kind of solved these for you and are gonna comment a little bit on how we solved these questions. And number 1 was kind of the easiest, but you need to kind of get the hint of what they're asking. So I underlined the sentence which kind of gives away the answer, because you were asked about if the ppf is constant, if it increases or decreases. Some of you guys had the China example, some of you guys had another country, but basically it would kind of substitute. So I think one of you guys had smartphones and tablets, or some of you guys had cars and trucks. So the main thing here is that they use the same inputs and equally to produce cars and trucks. An example of something that isn't equal is, let's say, a airplane producer and a table producer, totally different inputs, or just take 2 separate goods, but they're almost substitutes. So that's why the ppf remains constant and they have a constant opportunity cost. For the number 2, once you know that it remains constant, it's easy to see that the answer of which graph it looks like is graph number 1, because if it's constant, it's going to be linear. And yeah, so just remember, if the same set of resources is equally useful in production, then you will have this linear opportunity cost. With number 2, it was a bit more tricky. So now we're using kind of math to kind of show. So the first thing that we're given is this little diagram with the country with rye and jeans, and we first have to calculate the opportunity cost of each of these goods. So you do that by kind of using the formula, the opportunity cost of good X divided by the opportunity cost of good X is basically good Y divided by good X. So in this case, it's the labor hours of jeans divided by the labor hours of rye. And here you see it's 2 jeans for content and it's 4 jeans for Delorium. So because content has a lower opportunity cost, it has a comparative advantage in rye, and vice versa. Delorium has a lower opportunity cost in producing jeans, so it has a comparative advantage in jeans. If you have a lower opportunity, so yeah. Do you want to say something, Justin?
Yeah, I think it's been great. Yeah, I just think like just what you said down there, lower opportunity cost. So therefore, you're gonna want to specialize towards your comparative advantage, just like you said.
So yes, so now kind of remember for the rest of the question, if you move forward to that, that content has the comparative advantage in rye. So now what's happening is they will specialize in this product. A real world example I'd like to use is, for example, think about Saudi Arabia and the production of oil. They have the comparative advantage in oil, so that's why they specialize in oil. However, first you're asked to see how much they would produce if they only produce this good. So also what you kind of see in here in number 1, that they have 4 million labor hours available, each of these countries. So that means you take these 4 million times what is given to you. So for rye, it's 8 times 4 million, because they use 8 bushels per labor hour, and Delorium, they have 20 labor hours per pair of jeans. So that yields us that content will produce 32 million rye and Delorium will produce 80 million jeans. The next question, it will ask you how much the consumption will increase. So obviously the consumption before they're actually calculating it for you, they say it's 23 million. So basically it's what you just calculated up here, the 32, the new consumption once they specialize minus what they would do before. So here, rye increases by 9 and jeans increase by 12. So having this information, this table is kind of, I'm zooming in, kind of easy to see. So first of all, you're asked, so without trade, they're basically consuming what they produce. So imagine it's kind of like an island away from the world. So if an islander produces something, they also consume it. But now, so that's why the production and consumption is here the same. It's 15, 15, 20, 20, 48. Now with trade, they will produce 32 because remember, they're not more producing any jeans content. So that means they won't produce any jeans. So that's a 0 and vice versa. Jeans, DeLorean will stop producing rye and only produce jeans. Now, the trade action, you had the opportunity of saying if it imports or exports, and the 18 was a given. So you didn't have to calculate how much they would export or import. And it's really easy to see that if a country has the comparative advantage in a good, it won't import that good because they're good at producing it. So that's why that's why it's exporting for rye and they import jeans because they don't have any, and vice versa. I hope this makes kind of sense. When you again think of Saudi Arabia, they would not import oil. Or Madagascar is a big vanilla producer. I think they produce 90% of the vanilla beans in the globe. They won't import vanilla beans from other countries. So then the last calculations you have to do is kind of with trade action, how much would they consume? So that's basically 32, no, it's 18, 32 minus what they're exporting. So you have 14 left here, 0, here 54 minus 0, oh no, 0, 54 minus 0 because they're importing 54, so they're consuming 54. Here, they're importing 18, consuming, they're exporting 54 from the 80 they produce, so they have 26 left. So gains from trade is basically, they went from consuming 8 to 14. So they increased their consumption of 6. Here they went from 48 to 54, increases by 6. Went from 15 to 18, increased to 3. Went from 20 to 26, increased to 6. So here, when you look at this graph, you kind of see that both countries are better off. And now let's go to number 3. Difficulties, yeah.
No, you're fine. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about number 4 with specialization in trade. It's number 4 on the MindTap. So in this case, we have 2 countries. We have Moldonia and Dasonia, and we'll give you guys these PDFs so you can read some of my comments on this question. So as we talked about, countries are going to specialize towards their comparative advantage. It means it can produce that good at a lower opportunity cost than its trading partner. So for instance, what we have right here first is we have Moldonia and Dasonia, and they're situated both at the same sort of production. So for instance, Moldonia in this case is producing 12 million pounds of potatoes and 6 million pounds of sugar. Same for Dasonia, 6 million pounds of sugar, 12 million pounds of potatoes. However, if we're looking at the comparative advantage, we have to take into consideration the opportunity cost. So in this case for Moldonia, it's how much sugar are they giving up to get how many potatoes? So we take, the y-intercept and divide it by the x-intercept. So that was 24 divided by 16, which is 3/2 or 1.5. So that means that for every unit or pound of potato, Moldonia is giving up producing 3.5 pounds of sugar. And for Dasonia, on the other hand, if we take 12 divided by 24, for each pound of potato, they're giving up 1/2 pound of sugar. So in this case, because it's a higher opportunity cost for Moldonia to produce potatoes and a higher opportunity cost for Dasonia to produce sugar, Moldonia is going to stick to sugar. Dasonia is going to stick to potatoes. And yeah, so both are going to specialize. So we're going to have from production, Moldonia is not going to produce any potatoes. Dasonia is not going to produce any pounds of sugar. So we're going to have 24 million pounds of sugar on Moldonia's part and 24 million pounds of potatoes on Dawsonia's part. Now we're going to talk about how they can benefit from this trade. So Moldonia and Dawsonia, and another thing that Alex had mentioned is most of the time they'll give you these trading agreements. So it's not anything you really have to calculate. It'll say something like the countries decide to exchange 4 million pounds of potato for 4 million pounds of sugar. So in this case, Moldonia is producing all of the sugar. However, it's going to have to give up 4 million pounds of its sugar to get 4 million pounds of potatoes. So in that case, the calculation should just be 24 minus 4, and that should get you 20 million pounds of sugar. But remember, they were producing no potatoes, so 0 plus 4 million pounds of potatoes. So mathematically on the Cartesian plane, they're at the point 420. So they're gonna obviously, can you just go back up there real quick, Alex? They're obviously gonna be at a point that was before trade not reachable on the PPF, so it's further out. That means that they're reaching consumption bundles that they couldn't reach had it not been for trade. They could only, beforehand, they would have only been able to reach the consumption bundles on that line. And yeah, now you can switch to the other one. For Dawsonia, it's the exact same thing. So they're only producing potatoes, but remember they have to give up 4 million pounds of potatoes to get 4 million pounds of sugar. So mathematically, they are now at the point 20,4. That means that they're outside their PPF, so they're reaching bundles that they couldn't reach before. So when you go to the fourth question, without engaging in international trade, Moldonia and Dawsonia would have been able to consume at the after trade consumption bundles. That's false because the PPF curve has shifted to the right, or it's shifted outward. So both countries gain from trade.
Also, some closing words. So basically, question 3 and question 4 are the same questions, just that on question 3, you're given this one table, and in question 4, you're giving the graph, but you could have easily graphed number 4 or number 3. So you could have made a table for number 4 and a graph for number 3. So all you're doing is you're given the initial PPF lines who are linear, and you're calculating the opportunity cost. You're finding out who has the comparative advantage, and then you're calculating after the trade what the new consumption is from both of these countries. It's the same question, just differently set up. And yeah, this is all. And I hope you guys make sense now for the future and for the exam. And I hope you guys liked this. And if you guys have any question, email me or Justin, or visit our office hours, or ask in class. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.